The hushed reverence inside the Sterling Reserve Bank's private client division was almost palpable. Sunlight streamed through towering arched windows, illuminating floors of polished Italian marble and reflecting off the gleaming mahogany desks where advisors spoke in low, confidential tones. The air smelled faintly of expensive leather and old money. It was a sanctuary built for fortunes, a place where multi-million-dollar transactions were discussed with the same quiet gravity as state secrets. Into this opulent silence walked Eleanor Vance. She wore a simple, well-pressed linen blouse in a soft, dove grey, tailored beige trousers that favored comfort over cutting-edge fashion, and practical, low-heeled loafers that had clearly seen many miles. Her shoulder bag was a sturdy, unbranded leather tote, slightly worn at the corners. Her light brown hair was tied back in a neat, sensible knot, and her face, framed by classic tortoiseshell glasses, was devoid of makeup, revealing clear skin and intelligent, observant blue eyes. At 52, she carried herself with a quiet dignity, but in this environment her lack of ostentation screamed out of place. She approached the nearest client associate desk, manned by a young man named Adrian Thorne, whose perfectly knotted silk tie and crisp white shirt seemed almost offensively pristine. He looked up, his polite smile faltering almost instantly as his eyes swept over Eleanor's attire. "Yes? Can I help you?" His tone was clipped, implying she might have wandered into the wrong section. "Good morning," Eleanor replied calmly, her voice soft but clear. "I need to make a withdrawal from my primary checking account, please. $400. Adrian blinked, his carefully cultivated professional mask slipping into visible surprise, quickly followed by a flicker of disdain. $400. Here, in the private division where advisors routinely handled seven-figure wire transfers before lunch. He seemed momentarily lost, as if the request itself was an anomaly that didn't compute within these hallowed halls. He visibly composed himself, forcing the polite smile back onto his face, though it now looked strained. "Of course, madam. May I see your identification and account card, please?" He held out a hand, his posture radiating a subtle impatience, already dismissing her as insignificant. A minor inconvenience in his otherwise important day, navigating the complex world of high finance. Eleanor produced her standard bank card and driver's license, placing them on the polished counter. Adrian picked up the cards gingerly, almost as if handling something unclean. He examined the driver's license, then the bank card, then back at Eleanor, his eyes lingering for a moment too long on her simple blouse. "Eleanor Vance," he read aloud, perhaps unnecessarily. He turned to his terminal, tapping the keys with exaggerated deliberation. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the soft clicks of the keyboard and the distant murmur of another advisor discussing offshore investments. Eleanor waited patiently, observing the subtle play of condescension on Adrian's face. She'd seen it before, this automatic assumption based on appearances. It was tiresome, but she learned long ago not to let it dictate her own sense of self-worth. Behind her, seated in plush leather armchairs, an older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, clad in expensive cashmere and dripping with understated gold jewelry, exchanged a quiet whisper and a shared, knowing glance in Eleanor's direction. Mrs. Harrington subtly adjusted her pearl necklace, her expression one of mild annoyance, as if Eleanor's mere presence was disrupting the carefully curated ambiance. Adrian sighed softly, a sound meant to convey weary tolerance. "All right, Miss Vance, $400. He made a show of verifying her signature, comparing it meticulously against the back of her card, a level of scrutiny rarely applied to established private clients for such a minuscule amount. "Cash, I presume?" he asked, his tone implying it was a rather gauche request. "Yes, please," Eleanor confirmed. Adrian turned back to his station, accessing the cash drawer. He counted out 4 crisp $100 bills, slowly, deliberately, placing them on the counter one by one, as if each note represented a personal sacrifice. "There you are," he said, pushing the money towards her with the tip of his finger. "Will that be all for you today?" The emphasis on all was unmistakable, clearly indicating he expected and hoped she would now leave and trouble him no further. The entire interaction felt designed to make her feel small, insignificant. a nuisance who didn't understand the unwritten rules of this exclusive space. Eleanor calmly placed the 4 bills into her wallet, tucked inside her worn tote bag. The Harringtons behind her shifted slightly, their impatience growing. Eleanor zipped her wallet closed and looked back at Adrian, who was already turning away, eager to resume more important tasks. "Actually," she began, causing Adrian to pause mid-turn, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "There is one other thing." Adrian sighed again, this time less subtly. "Yes?" he asked, making no effort to hide his impatience. Behind him, Mrs. Harrington tapped her foot lightly on the marble floor. "I need to arrange a wire transfer," Eleanor stated calmly. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. A wire transfer? From her? He probably assumed it was a small amount, perhaps closing the account after this peculiar cash withdrawal. "All right," he said, pulling his keyboard closer again. "Recipient bank details, account number, name, and the amount?" He prepared himself for a few thousand, maybe 10,000 at most, a standard, slightly bothersome transaction he could process quickly to get her out of the way. "The recipient is the Global Health Initiative Foundation," Eleanor said, providing the necessary routing and account numbers from a slip of paper she retrieved from her folder. Adrian typed them in mechanically. "And the amount, Ms. Vance?" he prompted, his pen poised over a form. Eleanor met his gaze directly, her blue eyes steady behind her glasses. Her voice remained soft, utterly devoid of drama, yet the words she spoke landed in the hushed room with the force of a thunderclap. $2 billion, she said. Adrian froze. His pen hovered motionless above the form. He stared at Eleanor, his mouth slightly agape, certain he had misheard. I beg your pardon?" he stammered, his professional veneer shattering completely. "Did you say billion?" Behind them, the Harringtons' quiet conversation abruptly ceased. Mr. Harrington, who had been examining his watch, looked up sharply, his expression incredulous. Mrs. Harrington's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot towards her hairline. Even the advisor at the next desk paused his hushed phone call, turning his head slightly. The quiet hum of the bank seemed to cease, replaced by a ringing silence. Eleanor simply nodded. "Yes, 2 billion, billion, she confirmed, spelling it out patiently as if for a child, though there was no condescension in her tone, only clarity. "Is there a problem with the transfer?" Adrian swallowed hard, his face paling visibly. $2 billion, from the woman in the plain linen blouse withdrawing 400 in cash. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake, a delusion, a prank. His mind scrambled, searching for a logical explanation, finding none. Adrian stared blankly at Eleanor for another second, before sheer panic seemed to override his disbelief. One moment, Miss Vance," he stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher. He practically leaped from his chair. I need to get my manager. This requires authorization. Please wait here." He scurried away towards the imposing frosted glass office at the back, leaving Eleanor standing alone at the counter. The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. The quiet judgment had been replaced by stunned, gaping silence. The Harringtons were now staring openly at Eleanor, their earlier expressions of annoyance replaced with utter bewilderment and a dawning, uncomfortable realization. Who was this woman? Eleanor, meanwhile, remained perfectly composed. She adjusted her glasses lightly on her nose and waited, seemingly unfazed by the shockwaves her request had sent through the room. Moments later, Adrian returned, followed closely by Ms. Vivian Holloway, the branch manager. Ms. Holloway was the epitome of corporate banking elegance, sharp grey suit, pearls, perfectly coiffed dark hair, and an air of absolute authority. She strode towards the counter, her expression a mixture of skepticism and stern disapproval. Adrian trailed behind her nervously. "Miss Vance?" Holloway addressed Eleanor, her voice crisp and carrying an immediate assumption of error or trouble. "Adrian tells me you're requesting an extraordinarily large wire transfer." Her eyes did a swift, dismissive appraisal of Eleanor's appearance, mirroring Adrian's earlier reaction, but amplified by her senior position. "May I please see your identification again, and perhaps you could explain the nature of this transfer?" The implication was clear. She suspected fraud, incompetence, or perhaps mental instability. Eleanor calmly presented her ID and bank card once more. "It's a philanthropic donation to the foundation I mentioned," she explained simply. "From my personal account. Account number—" She recited the number again clearly. Holloway snatched the cards and turned to Adrian's terminal, her lips pursed tightly. "Adrian, verify the account status immediately. Check all flags, holds, and identity markers." Adrian, hands trembling slightly, began typing furiously. Holloway watched the screen intently, her stern expression unwavering, still clearly expecting the system to invalidate the request, to confirm her initial judgment that this plainly dressed woman couldn't possibly command such resources. The tension was thicker than ever, the silence almost unbearable as they waited for the digital verdict. The tapping of keys stopped. Adrian stared at the screen, his face now completely ashen. He looked up at Ms. Holloway, his eyes wide with shock and a growing sense of terror. "Ms. Holloway," he whispered, unable to form a complete sentence. Holloway leaned closer to the screen, reading the information herself. Her own composure finally, irrevocably cracked. The account was valid. The identity markers matched perfectly. The available balance wasn't just sufficient, it dwarfed the requested $2 billion by an astronomical margin. The system also flagged the account holder, Eleanor Vance, primary signatory, linked to the Vance Industries Trust, one of the largest and most discreet private fortunes in the country, managed through Sterling Reserve for decades. This wasn't just a client, this was royalty in their world, royalty they had just treated like a shoplifter. Holloway straightened up abruptly, her face flushing a deep red. She turned to Eleanor, her entire demeanor undergoing a whiplash-inducing transformation. The sternness vanished, replaced by a wide, panicked, overly solicitous smile. "Madam Vance!" she exclaimed, her voice suddenly syrupy sweet. "My deepest apologies. There seems to have been a slight procedural confusion." She practically bowed. "Of course, we can handle this transfer immediately, absolutely. Adrian, expedite this now, use the priority channel." Adrian, still looking stunned, fumbled back to the keyboard. Holloway turned back to Eleanor, wringing her hands slightly. "Can I offer you some refreshments while you wait? Coffee, sparkling water, perhaps a private office for your comfort?" The groveling was immediate and intense. The Harringtons, witnessing this complete reversal, exchanged horrified looks and quickly gathered their belongings, practically fleeing the bank in embarrassment. Eleanor watched the manager's frantic performance with the same quiet detachment she had shown earlier. The sudden deference felt just as artificial as the previous condescension. "No, thank you, Miss Holloway," she replied evenly. "I'm fine waiting here. I trust Adrian can handle the transaction efficiently now." Her calm gaze held a weight that made both Holloway and Adrian flinch. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been utterly inverted, and the simple act of requesting her own money had exposed the bank's superficiality more effectively than any complaint ever could. "Ms." Holloway hovered nervously near the counter, while Adrian, now sweating visibly despite the cool air conditioning, processed the wire transfer with painstaking care, double and triple-checking every digit under the manager's anxious gaze. The previous arrogance and impatience were gone, replaced by fawning, terrified subservience. "Madam Vance, please accept my sincerest apologies for any inconvenience caused earlier," Holloway repeated, her voice strained. "Our standard security protocols for large sums, sometimes, well, there's no excuse for not recognizing a valued client such as yourself immediately." Eleanor simply nodded slightly, offering no absolution. "Protocols are important, Miss Holloway," she said quietly. "Treating all individuals with basic respect regardless of the transaction size or their appearance should perhaps be an even more fundamental protocol." Holloway flushed again, murmuring agreement. The wire transfer confirmation finally printed. Adrian shakily handed the receipt to Eleanor. It's complete, Madam Vance," he stammered. Eleanor took the receipt, checked it briefly, and placed it in her folder. She then retrieved the $400 in cash from her wallet and placed 3 of the $100 bills back on the counter. "Actually," she said, looking at Adrian, I only needed 100 in cash after all. Could you redeposit the 300, please? This final simple request, delivered with the same calm demeanor after the multi-billion-dollar transaction, seemed to utterly break Adrian. He stared at the bills as if they were alien objects, his mind clearly unable to cope with the sheer incongruity of it all. Ms. Holloway stepped in quickly. "Of course, Madam Vance. Adrian, handle the deposit immediately." She forced another brittle smile. "Is there anything else at all? Anything we can assist you with today?" Eleanor picked up her tote bag and slung it over her shoulder. "No, Ms. Holloway, that will be all." She gave a polite, neutral nod to both the manager and the associate, then turned and walked towards the imposing entrance of the private banking division. Her loafers clicked softly on the marble floor, the sound echoing in the now profoundly awkward silence. She didn't look back at the wreckage of their assumptions. Eleanor Vance stepped out of the cool, hushed interior of Sterling Reserve Bank and into the bright sunlight and bustling noise of the city street. She paused for a moment on the top step, adjusting her glasses. The worn leather tote bag felt comfortable on her shoulder. Inside it, nestled between her paperback novel and her notebook, was the wire transfer receipt confirming a $2 billion donation that would fund critical medical research and provide aid to thousands across the globe. Beside it lay the single $100 bill she had actually needed for a small purchase later that day. She hailed a standard yellow taxi, ignoring the lineup of black town cars waiting nearby. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, she glanced back briefly at the imposing facade of the bank. She wondered fleetingly if Ms. Holloway and Adrian would keep their jobs. Perhaps, perhaps not. It wasn't really her concern. Her concern was the foundation, the work it did, the lives it touched. Her wealth was a tool, a responsibility, not a shield or a costume. She didn't need the bank's fawning approval, just as she hadn't needed their condescension. She opened her paperback novel as the taxi navigated through traffic, ready to immerse herself in another world, leaving the brief, unpleasant drama of Sterling Reserve behind. The city rushed past her window, unaware of the quiet woman in the back seat, who had just wielded immense power with understated grace, proving that true worth is never determined by the size of a withdrawal slip or the label on one's clothes, but by the content of one's character and the impact of one's actions. The real transaction that mattered had nothing to do with billions. It was the simple exchange of dignity, something she always carried, regardless of whether others chose to recognize it. The incident at Sterling Reserve, while unpublicized, sent quiet shockwaves through the bank's upper management after Eleanor made a discreet call to a senior board member she knew personally. Ms. Holloway and Adrian Thorne were subjected to a rigorous internal review. While not immediately terminated, they were both placed on probation and reassigned to less prestigious roles. Far from the private client division, their careers significantly impacted. Mandatory bank-wide retraining sessions on client interaction, unconscious bias, and the importance of universal respect were swiftly implemented, using the anonymized incident as a stark case study. The Vance Industries Trust, meanwhile, continued its quiet but massive philanthropic efforts under Eleanor's direction. The $2 billion donation to the Global Health Initiative Foundation made headlines, though Eleanor herself remained characteristically absent from the ensuing press coverage, letting the foundation's work speak for itself. The Harringtons likely never forgot their hasty retreat, perhaps sharing the story in hushed tones within their exclusive circles as a bizarre anecdote, a reminder that vast wealth doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Eleanor continued her life much as before, attending foundation meetings, managing investments, reading her novels, and occasionally visiting banks for transactions large and small, always dressed in her comfortable, unassuming style. She remained proof that judging by appearances is not only unkind, but can lead to spectacularly embarrassing miscalculations. Her quiet power resided not in flaunting her resources, but in wielding them effectively and living authentically, regardless of the world's expectations or assumptions. The woman who asked for $400 was the same woman who commanded billions. The difference lay only in the perception of others. If this story about the folly of judging by appearances resonated with you, please give it a like. Share it with friends who appreciate substance over flash. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories where quiet strength speaks volumes. Thank you for watching.